You're listening to the Add Water and Stir podcast with Mimi and ABM. If you are fostering, adopting, or parenting a child of color, then this podcast is for you. Welcome. Get comfortable. Take your shoes off. You're at home now. On to the show.
Welcome to the 54th episode of the Add Water and Stir podcast. I am adopted Black mom of the blog of the same name, and I am the adoptive mother to Hope, who's 15.
And I'm Mimi from the blog Mimi Robinson Online, and I'm the adoptive mother of Nana, who is 5 now.
5!
Yes.
Congrats. You are listening to the Add Water and Stir podcast, where we have candid conversations about fostering, adopting, and parenting children of color. Our goal is to give voice and visibility to families like ours who are often left out of the mainstream adoption conversation. Join in the conversation as we talk about the impact of race, class, and privilege on raising healthy, well-adjusted brown and Black children. Feel free to drop a question in the comments on our blog at www.addwaterandstirpodcast.com, or you can tweet us at AWAS pod. That's AWASPOD. So as is our practice, we do a little bit of an update on our lives before diving into our topic. So Mimi, what's going on?
So since we talked last, we had the birthday party, and it happened to come on the same weekend that Snowmageddon was scheduled to come to Missouri. So a lot of people dropped out, and I still feel some kind of way about that, because it actually did not snow. The streets were cleared and people still did not come. We still had a good bunch of people, but those parties are expensive. And if you RSVP to my party and then don't show up, I have forgiven, but I have not forgotten. And what happened to the present? So, I know I should not feel like that. It's a birthday party, but I have these feelings about it, which now I say, okay, that there's a good reason why we only need to have these every 5 years, because there's just too much going into it.
Too much going in and too much fallout afterwards, huh?
Yeah, so you RSVP to come to the party and you didn't come to the party. So where my kid present? Anyway.
Because you should have bought it.
Hello? I know that sounds so petty, doesn't it? But honestly, it's almost like a wedding, right? So you pay so much money for people to come, and you're like, so
per person cost.
Yeah, the gift should equal the amount that you spent on the party. It's too much. Am I the only petty parent out here like this?
Well, I guess you just need to blow off those kids' birthday parties then later in the year.
But then my kid don't get to go bouncing. So I don't know what to do. What do you do? I'd like to hear from the audience. What do you do when that happens to you? Do you throw extravagant birthday parties? Do you feel some kind of way when people RSVP and don't come? Because then I could have invited other people that may have come that didn't make the list. So I learned too to over invite.
Mm-hmm.
It was bad because one family had 4 kids that then were like, oh, well, we can't come. And they had a reason. They were sick. But then I was like, but I got 4 spots now available, and then it's kind of whack to call up people that you didn't invite to the party and be like, hey, what you doing? You want to come and hang out and bounce? And it's like at her birthday party. Like, did you know she was having a birthday party?
Right.
For today?
Did you have to make a reservation? How long ago did you make a reservation?
So the whole thing is just...
So for any of Mimi's second tier friends, the bench warmers, y'all gonna get an invite next year.
This is the worst, man. So what's going on with you?
Okay, so we are still deep in the throes of the Alarm Clock Chronicles, and Hope only missed the bus once this week. She has been on her game, and
that's improvement.
It is, but it's so funny because she always ends up missing the bus on the day like that the weather is the worst during the course of a week, which I just think is the Holy Homeboys way of saying, see, like, game on. So yeah, natural consequences. And so we've got the alarm clock situation. We've got money issues. If you follow me on Facebook, you've been following our K-pop issues, which are always amusing. for other people, not for me. But anyway, so recently she decided she wanted to order yet another version of the same CD that she has, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 of. Like, and I'm like, what is with these groups? These K-pop groups will have like 18 different versions of the same album, like remix, and she wants all of them. So anyway, she got her little money together, and with the conversion rate, the album was really inexpensive, but the customs fees and the shipping fees and all of that came to like $73, and she didn't have enough money. Whoo, child. It was sad, but I laughed on the inside. Man, I laughed because she was like deep in the throes of the whole Book of Lamentations up in this joint. It was crazy. Like, oh, why does it cost so much? So then I had to explain tariffs, import and export. It became a nice political conversation about importing and exporting things and kind of what's going on in the country right now. So that was kind of cool. Long story short, though, I did end up breaking down, and she will not get her allowance because she did ask me, could I front her the money? And I was like, you don't have good credit.
You are hard.
I am the bank of ABM. So I do pre-garnishment.
I am taking notes.
So anyway, between that, I'm doing better at caring less about grades, and her grades have gone up. So yeah, we're good. Anyway, so Mimi, what are we talking about today?
Today, we are talking about parenting in the age of Trump, the impact of the Trump presidency. And I have to admit, before we get into this, that we have tried to tape this episode multiple times. And most of the times that we don't tape it is because I get really emotional talking about these things. To be completely frank, I am overwhelmed by the changes that are happening since Trump has been voted into office. And because of my timeline on Twitter and Facebook, I'm continually getting updates about the changes that he's making and the executive orders he's doing. And I'm just, honestly, I'm afraid. I'm afraid for myself. I'm afraid for my husband. I'm afraid for my kids and what's going to happen in the future. And so it's been very, very hard to get this podcast out, but we feel like it's really important for us to be honest about that. And the reason that we are so afraid, because we are people of color and our children are children of color. And we know that a lot of the changes that they are making are going to affect us in some way. And so I just wanted to give that as kind of a prelude to what we're talking about today.
Ditto. For me, it's not that I've not been emotional, but I worked in politics hardcore for about 10 years. And so there's a part of me that is able to emotionally detach, but I'm feeling it though. I think I just have had 10 years of practice of masking in a city like where I live in order to kind of get the job done. But yeah, I mean, I feel it. A lot of my friends and colleagues feel it, other parents, other non-parents. I think that people of color and people who are woke or socially conscious are really feeling really, really emotional. So we think it's really important for us to talk about parenting in the age of Trump. So yeah, so let's do this. So today we're talking about what's known as the Trump effect. The Trump effect is the relative impact that the recent election and now recently seated president has on daily life here in the States. Trump comes to the presidency with one of the lowest approval ratings in U.S. history. 75% of Americans with kids under the age of 18 say Trump is not a good role model for children. And this was a poll that was done by the Huffington Post and YouGov.com. While certainly a lot has been written about his supporters and his detractors, and we can expect, we probably can soon expect an autopsy report from the Democratic Party on the loss in November, any day now, I don't think that we want to focus on the politics of it specifically. Today's discussion is really about how to deal with the social fallout for families raising children and raising specifically children of color. The reality is that for many of us, this presidency affects our parenting. And in fairness, the Obama presidency also had a huge impact on raising kids of color, both positive and sometimes questionably negative. So let's dive in and talk about parenting in the age of Trump.
Okay, so in the first 10 days after President Trump won the 2016 election, there were nearly 900 hate incidents documented by the Southern Poverty Law Center. That is a lot. And while the number seems large and significant, it really fails to capture many of the skirmishes that have upset brown and black families in the U.S. 3 days after election, ABM let me know that she called Hope out of school because of a race-based verbal assault that was so upsetting that Hope called upset and afraid. So that's what we're talking about. It affects us individually too. And so whether Trump believes a lot of the things that he says or shares the beliefs of the voters, there is no question that the election has brought racial hate back out into the open. Trump himself has sought Black and brown votes by arguing that many of us and our children are living in abject poverty. We're unemployed, we're possibly unemployable, we live in ghettos, we're subjected to endless violence and need more policing at a time where death by police fire seems to be on the rise. And he argued, by voting for him, what do we have to lose? And we object strongly to that characterization of us. I mean, we're on this podcast every other week and talking to you about us, and we don't live in abject poverty. We don't have the challenges that he's talking about. And I would gather that while that is a concern for a lot of families, it does not represent us all. So what are some of the big issues? And we've kind of broken these out into 4 big things. First of all is, do you talk to your kids about Trump or not, about politics? Secondly, what about the racism? Third, the sexism. And lastly, the medical implications or the policy implications of some of the changes that he's suggested that should be made. So let's start off first about talking to your kids about politics. I know, ABM, that you and Hope, that is really a part of your lifestyle, to talk about politics and to watch many of the things that happen. What made you decide to do that, and how do you work that into your life?
Well, national news is local news here. My daughter is 15. This is the first national election that she is old enough and kind of stable enough to really pay attention to. 3 short years, well, 2.5 years, she will be eligible to vote. One of her birthday gifts will be a voter registration form. And I listen to a lot of political podcasts, particularly the NPR political podcast. And so, she's really kind of attuned to a lot of these things. And we talk about it, and we talk about what it means and what it means for families like ours specifically. The lenses that we've looked through as both people of color and as women. And I think that certainly for 15, I think everybody's family needs to be talking about these kinds of things. I think that your kids are just old enough, and it's a part of kind of the civics upbringing that we should be engaged in this country. And so 15 for us, teenagers are really paying attention to this. But we recognize at the other end of the continuum where you are, for 5, this is not, I'm guessing this is not on Nana's radar.
Well, you know what? This is interesting because it is somewhat on her radar screen, because my husband and I have watched the debates. She's normally asleep by that time, but we have talked about it. I took her with me to vote, so she understands that President Obama was the president of the U.S. and that his time was up, and that we were voting for Hillary Clinton and that Trump won. So she understands the mechanics of that, but she really doesn't understand the impact. She just turned 5, so she kind of gets it at a high level, but I have not taken the time to really talk to her in detail about it. We don't watch it all the time. It's not all the time on. And I think that's, for us, probably the right thing at this time. I think it's too much to try to get her into the political implications and discussions about that. But we do try to talk about it high level. Now, I will say the only thing she will say about every time she sees Trump, she knows he's the president, and she says he's a bad man. And that's pretty much the end of the discussion. And she really likes Obama. And if you follow me on Facebook, you know that she has random conversations about President Obama, and when she's teaching her pretend classes. But I did read an article on Politico where a lady talks about how her 6-year-old is very in tune to race, and they watch a lot of the things on Trump, and he's aware of who Trump is and what his slogan is. And I thought that was interesting. And to me, there is a significant difference between 4 and 6. 4 is pre-K and 6 is first grade. There's a difference, but I'm just interested in how to make that transition between talking to her in a preschool way versus integrating more into the conversation. And honestly, I am a little afraid of it. I'm not exactly sure what to tell her and what information to give her and where to stop. I want her to be aware but I don't want her to be afraid.
Yeah, I mean, I think that some of the conversations will really be about socially what's happening to and around them on a day-to-day basis. Now, we know that that might be because of a rise in the number of hate crimes or the types of conversations that other families might be having at their dinner table, and how kids repeat some of those things. You know, there was an interesting Rolling Stones article about how kids are handling the aftermath of the election. And some of the things that they found were very much like what I had to deal with shortly after the election here with Hope. There are a number of kids who I think either on their own or are repeating things that they're hearing from families, and they feel really emboldened by this whole like anti-PC, air quote, it's okay to say racist, sexist, misogynistic things, so I'm going to do that to my classmates. And what we're seeing is that there's a lot of ugly things happening in schools, and we're not really focusing on civility,
right,
and all of those kinds of things, and how to disagree without being disagreeable. There's just some really ugly things happening. For me, I mean, I think it's different because I think that Hope sees the connection. But for younger kids, I don't think it's necessarily to kind of be like, and this is why this is happening, because, you know, our president is blah, 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 blah. But you're kind of troubleshooting at a very local level about what's happening in your schools and in your community. And as adults, we might see that connection, but it's really difficult to kind of figure out how to translate that into an age-appropriate discussion.
But I think what we were saying is that, yes, you should, in an age-appropriate way, begin to talk to your children about politics. Even generally understanding that we do live in a place that has a president, just some of these high-level concepts are good for them to start to understand, even at such a young age. And then what we start to do as they get older will depend on what's age appropriate for that time. But then I agree with you, we don't have to try to draw the connection between who the president currently is and what they may be expressing or what they may be experiencing in their class every day.
Yeah. But I do think it's really important, though, for parents, particularly in transracial families, to be really, really have their finger on the pulse of what's going on in their kids' kind of social world, especially if you're living in a pretty homogenous kind of environment, not very diverse and those kinds of things. You know, your kid may or may not tell you that he or she is being subjected to a lot of kind of ugly rhetoric that may be increasing because of the tenor and tone of political kind of conversations in this country. And so you need to pay attention and you need to have those kind of conversations, which I think brings us to our next topic about race in particular.
So on race, some folks are completely unbelieving that there has been an uptick in racially motivated incidents, but the Southern Poverty Law Center tracks these things. And as we mentioned before, nearly 900 incidents have occurred in the days after the election. Furthermore, the SPLC tracks the emergence of hate groups in the U.S. And at the time of this recording, there are 892 documented hate groups in the U.S. 32 are in Virginia, 5 very close to ABM, and 22 in Missouri. And so it is definitely important that we begin to talk about race if you haven't already talked about your children, because they will start to experience some of these things. One of the things that we want to highlight is about microaggressions and macroaggressions. ABM mentioned this, that the line is blurring because some Trump supporters are tired of being politically correct. What we have identified as just being civil by trying not to be mean to people and say things that may offend them. They consider that as a limitation of their free speech. So there's a recent This American Life episode that explores trolling for Trump and how it's designed to provoke people. And so there's an enormous amount of racism embedded in the activity. But this comes up just in your day-to-day lives. We've seen postings on Facebook about people going to Starbucks or people in line and people feeling like because Trump has won the presidency that they're now entitled to skip to the front of the line. Just random things that are just amazing that people are doing now. It's really scary because when this happens, you don't know who's going to stand up for you.
Yeah. Where are your allies? It's pretty crazy. I mean, and there are lots of documented incidents where people just feel very entitled. I mean, supremacy is a hell of a drug, right? This idea that this is freedom of speech. And what I was always taught is, yeah, you can say whatever you want to say. That doesn't mean that there's not consequences.
Exactly.
Like, that doesn't mean that you just can walk around saying it and walk away unscathed. You know, I do think that some of those things that we'll see, we'll continue to see not only things being perpetrated upon people of color, but we're also going to see some folks kind of fighting back. And that concerns me as well, because I mean, how many times do you turn the other cheek? I'm sorry, I only got 4 that I'm walking around with on this body. And you can come to that count however you want.
That is funny. You know, you mentioned something. I want to highlight this perception that's being advanced that Black and brown people are not culturally inspired to work, that we embrace dysfunction, that we're a bull on the backside of the country. And that continues to be advanced, even with some of the latest things from Trump about going into Chicago with
the National Guard.
Yes, troops and things like that. And so these are the type of things that impact your children, not only when you talk about very visible things, but those things are an expectation for your children at school, how your children are getting treated when they go into stores, and especially for people who live in communities that are pretty racially homogenous. Your children are a lot of times targeted for this type of behavior because there's already a perception that they're not supposed to be there and that they couldn't possibly have the money to be there, or they couldn't possibly have the right education to be there. And so that's something that for me personally, I have a heightened alert about. And even though she's in pre-K, I still always check to see what could be the possible rationale behind things that come home. If she has a bad report, I'm looking to see, is this something that I think that is really her behavior, or do I think that you might be mistreating my child? And that's a stress that you're always dealing with, how to deal with teachers and principals when they're disciplining your children.
Yeah, I mean, you know, this kind of dysfunction, I mean, it's not just that we're not inspired to work or that we just embrace dysfunction for the heck of it, but there are actually people that believe that Black and brown people are genetically predisposed for this kind of foolishness, right? And so it really fights against this discussion about nature versus nurture. You can be like, oh no, I'm raising Johnny to be a good kid, and you are, but there are people that really believe that no matter what you do,
yes,
this is who Johnny is. And so you need to be really visible. You need to be very present. This is one of the reasons why, like, I am Dr. ABM when I roll up to Hope School, because, like, I need them to know from the jump. When I walk through that door, I'm not here to play. You're not going to treat my kid any old kind of way.
And I think that visibility helps because I'm very visible at my child's school too. So they know that I will be up there if there's a challenge. And I think that our children want to know that their parents have their backs in that way too. But there's other things that are happening in regards to race too. What does it mean when the White House's page on civil rights is replaced by a pro-policing page? Yeah. That means the highest place in our government that we should be able to go for solutions and help has decided that that is really not an issue of priority. When we talk about adoption and we talk about internationally born children, it is imperative that you go ahead and move forward and get your citizen certification documents, because there are plans in place to do more mass deportations. And we've already seen instances of where children who don't have their citizenship papers have been deported. And the reality is, with Trump's new cabinet, it is the most homogenous cabinet that we have seen in years. And what that means for my daughter, seeing President Obama as her president was awesome. She still feels some kind of way that she did not get to meet him. But now we don't have anybody in those high level offices that our children can look up to and aspire to. And that's important when you're raising a child of color, that they have those mirrors in high places. And particularly for transracial families who may not be in places where they can see other people who look like them in those places. So they have to look externally for those.
Yeah, we're talking about generations of kids that have sometimes never seen a non-Black president, right? Like, they know he's the first, but they also know
he is
normal. Like, this is normal for me. And so I'm not saying that there needed to be another person of color in the presidency following him. Certainly, we would love to see increased diversity. But the reality is the cabinet that's been selected is pretty homogenous. I mean, it's homogenous by race, almost certainly by gender. Most of them are billionaires.
Yes.
So there's an absence of mirrors in places that matter. And that it's not because there aren't qualified people for those positions. Let's be very clear about that. So get your papers. This is not a time to sleep. This is really important stuff to be very mindful about. So the next issue that we wanted to talk about with respect to the Trump presidency is really, what do we tell our daughters? Mimi and I are both parents to young girls. How do we teach them to respond to people who repeat things about women that were said during the election? How do we teach them about consent? How do we teach them about reporting when your bodies have been attacked? How do we teach our daughters to stand up for themselves? How do we teach our sons that these things are important and that they are their job as well? This is really important since one of the biggest role models is often the president of the US, and his track record with women is shaky on a good day.
On a good day. And I think the other challenge with that is a lot of us look to the First Lady, Michelle Obama, as part of that. She's a person who stood up for health. She stood up for women. She stood up for veterans. I mean, she had a great platform that a lot of us could look up to her and follow. And my daughter, the same. But I'm not sure that we will find the same thing in the current First Lady.
I mean, it's interesting because, Michelle Obama, whether you agree with her husband or even her politics, her approval rating was always higher than his. So for moms, the other thing that I think is important is not just what is Melania Trump going to do, but Ivanka, who has been labeled as this neo-feminist. For those of us that are kind of chasing the dream of having it all, working at home and working outside of the home, she talks about, if you just work hard enough. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't have the resources for that dream that includes house help.
And Sheryl Sandberg even had to
walk it back.
The saint of lean forward had to walk her position back when she understood that once she was in a position where she didn't have the help and support that she had previously of her husband, she realized this is a lot harder than I thought it was.
Right. And she's rich. How do we model our version of feminism for our sons and daughters in the current climate? What does it mean to be pro-woman under this administration? What will the opportunities be for our children, especially our little girls? And again, where are those gender mirrors in positions of high places? This is really important.
It is. And it's important for us to be active in this fight, because when we talk about gender, we're also talking about reproductive issues. We have little girls. And so when we talk about birth control, we talk about access. All those things are being talked about and changed. And while that might not be as much of an issue for us, I still want those to be choices for my child. And so it's important for me to be visible in the fight when we talk about gender and sexism, but also reproductive rights. And I think that goes into the next piece of this when we talk about what does it mean for our medical issues.
Yeah, a friend of mine posted recently, and this is one of the reasons why I put this on our list, but she posted that rape is a pre-existing condition. And I mean, it really drove me back on my heels. And the reason why it's considered a pre-existing condition is because of the medical and emotional mental health treatment that you may need after sexual assault. And so while many adoptive and foster families use Medicaid, there are those of us who also have private insurance for our children. I know that Hope has access to Medicaid, but she's on my private insurance in order for us to access certain providers that I prefer and don't take Medicaid. But the reality is almost all of our kids, if you're adopting from foster care, especially, they have pre-existing conditions.
Absolutely. And how this affects me personally is that, like you, for most of the time that we've had our daughter, we have had private insurance. But this year, because the cost of private insurance has increased so much, we decided to take our daughter off our private insurance and use Medicaid by itself. And what that does is make it more challenging to find providers that we feel comfortable with. I mean, the good thing is that Medicaid for foster kids in at least in Missouri is really good. However, it may come up with challenges in the future. And honestly, it was a scary choice for me to make, to use Medicaid only and not use that private care. But the cost was just too much for us.
Yeah, every year I have to reevaluate, and then I kind of like sit down and say, well, what about the continuity of care? Certain providers take both. And that's great. We use Medicaid as a secondary, but they're providers at any time they could decide to not take, one or the other. And we've spent 3 years building relationships where my daughter trusts the providers and she trusts me to make good decisions. But the reality is all her stuff is pre-existing. I mean, it predates me, right? And so what does that mean in the event that provisions that protect those things change? And I mean, we're not just talking about today. There are also provisions that would allow me to keep her on my insurance until she's in her 20s. I already know that my daughter is not going to launch at 18. I know that. She's going to need a little bit more time, and she's going to need the safety net that I provide for her. And at 18, she's off of Medicaid. So, these are real decisions and real things that families need to talk about when we talk about the policy implications that this administration is advancing. And we can talk about replacement, but these are some core things that are just important. And Mimi was talking about reproductive health. I work in medical education, but I used to work for a women's health organization in particular. And I don't like to distinguish between all of these different types of care. This is medical care. And I want my daughter to have access to all of the available options for whatever treatment she might need for whatever medical issue needs to be addressed. I don't care what it is. And at some point in her life, it's none of my business what it is.
Right.
And I want her to have choices, just like I want her to have choices in any other area of her life. The other thing is that these things also impact birth families and biological families who have a hard time keeping and continuing care. A lot of these families that may be struggling with substance abuse or all of these kinds of things, you don't know if they're going to be able to keep and, again, continue the care that they need that helps them pursue reunification of their families. Reunification is supposed to be a goal, but I question whether or not some of our policies really lead us to that phase.
Considering that it's already challenging enough for them to address some of these issues while trying to maintain a job and getting transportation. And if you talk to any of those service providers who are helping with family preservation, they realize that it's challenging and their budgets are limited now. And so to continue to have cuts to those type of things just continues to limit access. And so perhaps this will put more children into the foster care system where family preservation will not be prioritized.
So, I mean, no matter your politics, these are some things that have real life implications for not only our families, but all families. And we just really want folks to be civil. You want to raise good kids. You want solid families. You want happy and healthy and well-adjusted Black and brown and white children too. And these things are really important. So what do we tell our children about the new president? So we've come up with a list of some things that we think are important. Some of these things are ours, and then we've also borrowed from a couple of other lists as well. And we'll put those links to some of the articles that we've been looking at in our show notes as always. So be actual and factual.
Not alternative facts, real facts.
Yeah, like don't go out there and let Merriam-Webster troll you like they do regularly on Twitter. There are some pretty clear things that President Trump has said and done that really should be an open part of the family dialogue about personal character. You can like him and stuff, but we cannot deny that there's been some stuff that families of kids who are old enough to handle certain kinds of discussions need to talk about in terms of how do you conduct yourself personally, and how do you demonstrate good character.
Next is combat the narrative that is being spun about Black and brown folks. While poverty rates and unemployment are disproportionately higher in communities of color, the characterization of our communities shields alternative facts that need to be corrected. we say research reputable sites for good data and information about what happens in community of color. But I want to add to that in not only combat the narrative, but teach your child to value their culture, whatever that looks like, whether that's the race, your ethnicity, your religion, because we haven't talked really about the fact that some of our listeners may be Muslim, they may be Hindu, they may be Buddhist, they may have some other things that are also being targeted in different ways. So teach them to value that, and not necessarily in opposition to any of the isms, but teach them to value themselves just for who they are and what that brings to the table.
Yeah. You don't need to go far for good data. The U.S. Census Bureau puts out regular, good quality data about the U.S. population, the demographics, levels of poverty, all kinds of good stuff. So start there. Start there. But look at actually good, reliable, reputable data. The other thing is recognize the lived experience of people of color around you, especially your children during this time. You need to pay attention. We're not just making stuff up like to make you feel bad. This is our life. This is our lived experience. And know that some of us are feeling very, very emotional right now, and that we're being subjected to some ugly stuff online and offline. Believe us and be empathetic. I follow a lot of political people on Twitter on both sides of the aisle. And every now and then a tweet will come up and it's like you trip over into another room of Twitter. And I mean, it's just ugly, nasty stuff being said about people who look like me. It's emotionally and spiritually nasty.
And draining and tiring and scary that the people that you're walking around every day, that you're shopping next to, the people that you're going to work with, the people that your children are playing with and going over their houses may actually believe this about you and you don't know. And that is a vulnerable position to be in. And I'm not sure that people really understand what that feels like to go through that every day.
Or that they believe that you're the exception. If you've been tuning into our This Is Us recaps, on episode 12, we kind of went into this whole thing about Randall being the magical Negro. Like for some of us, we're in these spaces where we're the only one, and people believe these things about people who look like us, but they say that we're the exception. We're the magical Negro. Like you're not like them. And that we're supposed to take pride in that. They tell us this is a compliment.
And you're like, but the them you're talking about is my mother and my uncle and my cousins and my family and the people that I went to school with and the people in my sorority. Like all those people that you're saying you're not like them, those are people that I'm exactly like. That I come from, that I'm related to. I can't allow you to say that I'm okay, but the rest of them are not.
Right. So the next thing is explore real allyhood. Now, some folks are all upset and crying, and now y'all are marching in the streets and you're putting these safety pins on. And it's like the first time since 1929 stock market that like something bad has happened to y'all. But we have been crying and dying in the streets for years, decades, and centuries. These marches that happened a week ago all over the world with the hats and the signs and the stay off my uterus and all of this. And I'm like, okay, but where were y'all? I mean, I live 50 miles from Baltimore. Where were y'all when Freddie Gray died? Where were you when Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old, was killed in Cleveland? Where were y'all? And thank you for like the 20 people that also carried the Black Lives Matter signs and stuff, but don't get it twisted. Like we need you all the time. And if you want us to march in solidarity goes both ways.
Right. Both ways.
So we will ride hard for y'all, but we need y'all to ride hard for us.
And your children need you to ride hard for them.
Yes.
And not within just affects them individually, but your children are going to grow up to be part of this community. They're not always going to be the exception and be surrounded by your friends and your community. They're going to grow up and they have to go back and live with the rest of the community that looks like them, especially the way that we are segregating ourselves in various ways. And so in order to show your children what true solidarity looks like, you have to be in step with things that may not be comfortable for you, but may affect your children in the future.
Mhm. So before I get into this list that we pulled from Huffington Post, I have to get on my this is no time for colorblind parenting soapbox. Y'all
Yes.
know how we feel about this. This is not a time for colorblind parenting. Just say no. Your kids need a safe space to talk about who they are, what their lived experiences are. They need to be able to tell you. You are supposed to be their safe space, and it's your job to help them navigate the uncertainty and the fear that they may be experiencing right now and in the future. So we did pull a great list from the Huffington Post. There was a great article called Raising Kids, I guess, in the Trump era. And we'll kind of run through that quickly. Teach kids, again, to disagree without being disagreeable. Like everything doesn't need to break down into a fight.
I saw this, but I must say that I have a little bit of challenge with this, because the reality is that when Black and brown people disagree, no matter how we disagree, no matter how soft we say it, no matter if I whisper it, if I sing it in a song, people will still think that I'm yelling. And so
Yeah.
I challenge this idea of disagree without being disagreeable, because I don't even know if that's possible for Black and brown children to do. The reality is I want to teach my children to stand up for what they think is right. And I want to give my children the freedom to do that and know that I can back them up. There is a way to say things without being disrespectful.
Yeah, right.
But that might look like disagreeable to somebody else. So
we mentioned this earlier, but take media literacy seriously, make it a priority, read reputable sites, also support your local newspapers.
Oh, absolutely. Support your newspapers. In order for us to continue to receive information about what is happening, we have to pay. We have to put our money where our mouth is.
Find engaging ways to expose kids to diversity. This is something that we talk about all the time. So it's nothing new for us on this show, but this is not just about making sure that your Black and brown kids are exposed to diversity. You need to round up everybody in that little minivan of y'all.
Yes, everybody.
And going down to wherever it is that your, cultural bonanza, festival, whatever it is that you're going to, don't just take the Black and brown kid. The whole family needs to actually embrace these kinds of activities. Maintaining a zero tolerance rule on bullying. And I have mentioned this, I think, many episodes ago. If your child is experiencing bullying at school, don't call and say so-and-so is messing with my kid, or my kid feels like they're being harassed. Apparently, there's something in the regs that say when you say the B word, bullying, all of a sudden, like, there's an investigation, there's like all kinds of stuff. Also, teach your kid what this kind of behavior looks like so that they can see it in themselves and that they are able to clearly identify it and tell you what it is.
And that your child is not a bully. You need to teach your children how to be civil to all types of people. And part of that is teaching them about differences and appreciating differences so that they don't get caught up in trying to bully other people.
Yes, the last one is self-care, which we're also big fans of. Let's put your own oxygen mask on first. And this is something I think that, frankly, we've tried to practice this week. Like Mimi said in our prelude, we tried to get into this a couple of times, but we couldn't. And we had to say, you know what, we got to take care of ourselves emotionally before we tackle this subject. And if that means that we have to delay recording in order to practice self-care, that's what we have to do. We love y'all, but we got to put on our own oxygen mask first and teach yourselves. You need to practice this. You need to model it for your kids and teach them how to practice self-care as well.
And I would say specifically during this time where we're getting so much information, so many news articles, so many tweets, that it may need to take a time out from the media, because for me, that's where I was getting overwhelmed. When you continually see things that are against your personhood, your gender, your race, your religion, how are you supposed to move forward in a positive way? So that's what we mean about putting on your own oxygen mask. Take a time out.
So I think we did it.
I think we did.
That's going to be it for this episode. This is a heavy topic for us. We are going to wrap our show, episode 54, Parenting in the Age of Trump, in order for us to go practice some self-care. because this is a tough topic for us. So do we have any recommendations as we wrap?
Well, as I told you to take a break from the media, now I'm saying, yeah, and then listen to this. I do want to talk about this new podcast that just launched from WNYC called Indivisible. It is a daily podcast, and it's a national conversation about America in a time of change. And it's for the first 100 days of the Trump presidency. And the interesting thing about this show is it's a call-in show, and it is nonpartisan. So Trump supporters, as well as people who don't support Trump, call into the show. And the purpose is to try to get people out of their bubbles and hear other perspectives and talk about different issues. So I suggest that you listen to the Indivisible podcast by WNYC. What about you? You have any other recommendations?
I do. I have a podcast recommendation as well, but it is not policy or politically related. It's called The Parenting Roundabout. It is about a 4 or 5 minute podcast that comes out daily. It's like a speed round, and it's a group of women that talk about, like, they have like a topic, and they talk about whatever is going on. Yesterday, they talked about their experiences in learning how to drive from their parents as they teach their children how to drive. So, of course, like, that's my thing right now. For example, today's episode is sweating the small stuff and talking about how do they try not to do that, or how do they get caught up in some of the minutia things around parenting. But it's quick, so it's not a huge time commitment, really short show. And it's something that I just happened to stumble upon recently, and I kind of like it. So there you go.
All right.
So you definitely need to check out our This Is Us recaps. 1, we love the show. 2, they are hilarious. 3,
yes,
you can see who we like and we don't like. And we are even less filtered than we are on our regular show.
Yes. And 4, we look at it through a perspective of race, class, privilege, and adoption, which I think is very different.
Definitely check it out. So, and as always, like our Facebook page, tell a friend, engage, please post questions. We love the love. Rate us on our Facebook page, but also rate us on the podcast app that you are listening to, particularly iTunes and Stitcher. Post your own favorite adoption quotes and stories and memes. We love hearing from you. So
thank you all for listening to another episode of the Add Water and Stir podcast. You can find the show notes at addwaterandStirPodcast.com. Subscribe and leave us ratings through iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast app. Like ABM just said, we love to engage with our audience. You can find us on Facebook, email us at feedback@AWASpod, or tweet us at AWASpod. So, ABM, where can they find you?
You can find me in the East Streets at my blog, adoptiveblackmom.com, and Pinterest, Twitter, and Facebook at the same name, adoptiveblackmom.com. And Mimi?
You can find me on my blog, MimiRobinsonOnline.com, or in Twitter at Mimi Complex, or you can try to find me on Facebook at Malika Robinson. All right, with that wraps up our show. So bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Add Water and Stir podcast. We're growing our community, so please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help other adoptive parents find us. For our show notes, check us out at addwaterandStirPodcast.com and follow us on Twitter at AWASpod for updates. See you next time.